machine had blown up the kids, there'd be pieces of them everywhere.
In 1989, Disney released a different kind of fantasy film. And while much of it may have seemed familiar with many of the elements you would have expected, below the surface lay something even more imaginative, more menacing, and even more heart-wrenching than anything the House of Mouse had recently put out.
He saved my life.
But as blown up as the Honey, I Shrunk franchise became,
Honey, I laminated the kids.
its origin is somehow even more strange.
We weren't even allowed to have our production offices on the Disney lot.
Or maybe it actually isn't, because like so many of the classics that came before, it too has its roots firmly planted in some of the grisliest horror tales ever told.
On the next Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, he's a cuddly little play pal.
With my evil modification, Fluffy will rule the world.
Looking back at the 1980s, it's pretty wild to think about just how all over the place Walt Disney Pictures live-action output was. In the best way possible, of course. I mean, Watcher in the Woods, Condor Man, Tron, Return to Oz, Flight of the Navigator, and so many others.
Bikers, Hell's Angels, they're taking over the lobby.
And then there's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Compared to these others, it's a pretty tiny film with an even smaller budget that had miniature expectations. The studio really just saw it as a simple rehash of familiar tropes and ideas that could make them a quick buck. But it was this familiarity that kept everything grounded, all while bringing us into the home of a wacky scientist, perfectly played by Rick Moranis.
Did you report some missing children?
Oh, there must be some mistake. Ours are in the backyard. Right, honey?
And it introduced the audience to a world we thought we knew, but were about to experience from a whole new perspective. Because the Zelinskys' backyard isn't just a small patch of grass. In Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the backyard is a wild and sprawling jungle, filled with endless possibilities for adventure. Insects are grotesque beasts, often terrifying, but somehow, some way, can still be lovable. And so much of this is all thanks to an unlikely duo who weren't exactly known for their warm and cuddly family films.
I am a butthead.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Did you write that?
When I was a kid, I used to lie down in the grass with little figures, like little soldiers or something. And I used to imagine what an incredible landscape it was to see the grass, to be in the grass, to see the roots of the trees, see the insects.
This change in perspective began when director Stuart Gordon and producer Brian Usna decided to create a movie like the ones they had loved as kids.
Stuart and I were having a barbecue in my backyard, and we both had kids. We're both family guys. I got 4 kids, he's got 3 kids. And he said, you know what? We should make a movie for our kids. Reanimator from Beyond, that's not for kids.
And it cannot be overstated just how influential the films of the 1950s were to a whole generation of filmmakers. Cold War fears, the space race, and rapid technological progress set the stage for a new wave of science fiction films. Audiences couldn't get enough. And studios loved the fact that they could often just churn them out on the cheap.
There it is now, attacking the United Nations building.
But as the film industry moved into darker and grittier themes of the 1960s and 70s, followed by the blockbuster era of the 1980s, a new wave of kids were growing up. Kids that had never experienced the over-the-top escapism of the 1950s. That's something that appealed to Disney. Their new leadership team was desperately trying to reinvent the company into a live-action powerhouse for all ages. And while the studio had found success with Touchstone Pictures, their in-house label aimed at an older audience, they hadn't quite cracked the code for Walt Disney Pictures.
He's been missing far too long. But now, Walt Disney Pictures and Joe Camp are bringing him back for his greatest challenge ever, Benji the Hunter.
Gordon and Usna ended up pitching 2 movies to Disney. The first was quickly passed over, but it would still come into play a bit later on. The second concept is what would become Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and it was just what the studio was looking for. A reinvention of a tried and true fantasy formula. Something with low risk and low expectations that could probably be done on the cheap.
Disney at that point didn't really believe enough in the movie. It was a low budget movie for them. And we weren't even allowed to have our production offices on the Disney lot. We had to have them a couple blocks away.
There was just one problem. Well, two problems actually. The first was their original title.
We called it the Teeny Weenies.
Yeah, Teeny Weenies.
We ended up with a meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and then we had lunch with him at the executive dining room where he told us that, we want to do this movie, but we're going to have to change the title. Teeny Weenies sounds like a low-budget corn movie.
That second problem? How exactly were they going to deliver a modern special effects movie that convincingly introduces audiences to a whole shrunken down world on the cheap?
We shot it in Mexico.
And with that, the pieces were all in place for Disney to give the film the green light. A low-budget special effects kids movie, produced by people with little studio experience outside of cult horror movies, all made in Mexico City. What could possibly go wrong?
Stewart had some health problems.
This place was hot. I'm talking like mosquitoes passing out over the heat.
There would be no unions.
Shooting down here presented a bit of a language problem.
We developed the whole movie. My kids were the test kids for writing the ant on our test footage. We did everything. We cast it. I moved to Mexico. The whole thing was shot in Mexico. And unfortunately, right before we were going to shoot, Stewart had some health problems and had to leave the production.
One of the biggest challenges came before filming even started. Co-creator and planned director Stuart Gordon fell ill at the end of pre-production, forcing him and Brian Usna to step away. Disney brought in Joe Johnston as a replacement who, at this point, had absolutely zero experience in the director's chair. But what he did have was arguably even more important, because Johnston came directly out of Lucasfilm, where he had spent his time as an art director in charge of miniature and optical effects. Important experience to have on a film that would live and die based on how believable its miniature world is.
It'll all sandwich very nicely with the background plate. Then you've got the kids' miniature. That's also another element. Then you've got this one here that's also an additional element. And then we've got to put dust in the shot. And then you got to put the kids in the shot. Then you've got debris that goes in. So there's quite a bit. Optically, it's tremendous.
Also joining from Lucasfilm was stop-motion legend Phil Tippett, who got to work sculpting many of the miniature creatures we'd see.
So this was done very similar to the way that Harryhausen would do his creatures.
Yeah, in 1958, Ray's 740 Sinbad came out, and then that was like the bolts of lightning that struck me in. That was it.
But Johnston and company didn't just deliver on the special effects. They also refocused the story to put an even stronger emphasis on the relationships built between friends and family.
To the Thompsons and the Zelinskis and many more dinners together.
Cheers. I mean, as a kid, would you rather spend your summer fishing with your dad or rolling around in the backyard with Amy Zelinsky and Russ Thompson?
Where'd you learn artificial respiration?
French class, kid.
Oh.
So while the exit of Stuart Gordon and Brian Usna was a major blow, the addition of Johnston and his team was a complete game changer.
I sort of wanted the machine itself to feel like it almost had a mind of its own. Almost like somewhere in here there's a brain that's gonna shrink those kids.
Don't feel too bad for Gordon and Usna though. While they continued to find varying degrees of success with their other projects, all that work to get Honey, I Shrunk the Kids into production still paid off in the end.
I made more money on that movie than anything else I've ever done. I think maybe Stewart did too.
Another negative turned positive turned out to be filming in Mexico City. Not only did it allow the production to take over 15 acres of the legendary Churubusco Studios, which is how we got those massive sets, but it also created a literal border between the film and any executive interference from Disney. Which was probably a big reason that Honey, I Shrunk the Kids worked out as well as it did. Because when the film finally did premiere, nobody could have expected just how huge the Zelinsky family and their unbelievable backyard were about to become.
Walt Disney Pictures presents Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the summer surprise hit. It was a great movie.
It's got the best special effects.
They're rad. That bee flight.
Hold on! The most original movie I've ever seen, to tell you the truth.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, rated PG.
By the time Shrunk the Kids was released in June of 1989, Disney's film division was rolling. The animation department had found success with Oliver and Company and was preparing to launch into the Renaissance era. Touchstone Pictures had continued to experience explosive growth, led by the box office smash hit Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Now they were looking for a similar success with Walt Disney Pictures' live-action division. And with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, they had a pretty good chance. But while the film was a charming and imaginative throwback aimed at a younger crowd, the marketing team felt like they needed help bringing in an even wider audience. They needed one of Disney's most widely recognized animated anthropomorphic animals. They needed the one and only Roger Rabbit.
From Walt Disney Pictures and Steven Spielberg, Roger Rabbit's back in an all-new maroon cartoon with Baby Herman and America's favorite nurse, Jessica.
Thank goodness I'm out of medicine.
Going up. Tummy troubles, playing together with...
Honey, I shrunk the kids. They're in the backyard.
Now the adventure of a lifetime begins.
We're all the size of boogers.
Hang on, kids!
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and a special added attraction, Tummy Trouble, rated PG. Now playing at a theater near you.
Adding a Roger Rabbit short into the mix had major upside for Disney. Sure, it would provide yet another opportunity to keep the character relevant, but also, Who Framed Roger Rabbit had been so successful across so many different audience segments that Disney felt that this might help the overall marketing effort. And that's even with Tummy Trouble having been the most expensive animated short that Disney had, at that point, produced. As producer Don Hahn put it, Roger has been so successful that we're in a position where a cartoon can help a movie from a marketing standpoint.
That was great.
If I have to swallow that rattle one more time, I'm gonna puke my guts out.
And as it turned out, the combination of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids' quality and Disney's marketing strategy worked. The film made over $200 million at the box office and ended up the 5th most successful film for all of 1989. Walt Disney Pictures was back in a big way, and they had every possible intention of blowing up Honey, I Shrunk the Kids into their next major franchise.
Now comes the new Disney MGM Studios theme park.
Their first follow-ups weren't even movies or a TV show. Instead, they were 2 interactive experiences at Disney MGM Studios theme park. Soon after the film's release, the studio backlot tour provided a glimpse at how the famous bee effect was created, and a lucky few guests even got pulled in to help recreate the scene.
So now your action, I want you guys to wave your arms, kick your legs, and look really scared, okay? All right, cameras ready? And action!
Next came Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set adventure. This basically delivered on what every kid was thinking while watching the movie. How much fun it would be to play around in an oversized backyard.
Hey kids, think you can find your way out of the backyard scene from the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set? Have fun trying.
Then in 1992, Disney delivered a full-blown sequel with Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. Much like the original, this also took inspiration from 1950s science fiction films, though in a bit of a different direction. Remember that other film idea that Stuart Gordon and Brian Usna had pitched Disney on? The one that was passed over for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? Well, that turned out to be a story about a child who gets hit with a growth ray and ends up temper tantruming his way down the Las Vegas Strip. After the first film's huge success, Gordon pitched the giant toddler idea to Disney again. This time around, they were a bit more receptive.
Walt Disney Pictures presents A Little Problem.
I blew up the baby.
That got bigger.
Do you see the size of his head?
And bigger.
There's no telling how huge he might get. He's over 100 feet tall.
And bigger.
Higher. Watch out for his butt.
Rick Moranis in the most incredible adventure of all.
Adam, don't eat us.
Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
Nothing can stop him now.
Starts Friday, July 17th at a theater near you.
But while Blew Up the Kid had impressive special effects and was a fun way to reunite the Zielinski family, it just couldn't capture the wonder and charm of the first film. And even though it made a comfortable profit, making $100 million in theaters off of its $32 million budget, Disney couldn't help but be disappointed. But you know what wasn't disappointing? Home video sales and rentals. to Disney, this was a clear indication that maybe the box office wasn't exactly where this franchise belonged. And so they got to work, shrinking down this larger-than-life franchise.
I'm on special assignment. Remember Professor Zelensky, that crazy scientist who shrunk the kids? Now Zelensky's experimenting at Epcot's newest attraction, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. And that could mean almost anything could happen. Who are you waiting for? Minnie Mouse!
In late 1993, Disney World unveiled their newest 4D experience with Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, located within Epcot. Using much of the same cast and crew from Blew Up the Kid, this 23-minute short film brought guests into an award ceremony gone haywire, with duplicating mice, giant animals, and of course, the audience shrinking.
Just when you're back to normal, safe inside the Imagination Pavilion, you're suddenly part of Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. Once again, you won't believe your size or the humongously funny mishaps surrounding you. So much for futuristic experimentation.
The experience was a major hit and captured much of the fun and imagination of the films. And so, over the next 4.5 years, Disney would open Honey, I Shrunk the Audience in its various other theme park locations as well. But the 4D experience was just a taste of what was to come, because in 1997, Wayne Szalinski and his wild inventions would invade living rooms in 2 entirely different flavors.
This is one of those huge blue screens we were talking about. All the adults in this movie work in front of these things, and it's not exactly easy work.
We have no idea because all the scenes we do are blue.
Everything is blue. We make it up as we go along.
In March 1997, Walt Disney Pictures released their first ever direct-to-video live-action sequel with Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. This third film tries to return to basics in more ways than you would expect.
Coming soon from Walt Disney Pictures. When he shrunk the kids, he promised his shrinking days were over.
All right, shrink machine, one last time.
But Rick Moranis has done it again.
We have critical mass.
Only this time,
Are we shrunk?
You shrunk us?
he's still got a few bugs to work out. From the makers of the smash hit Honey, I Shrunk the Kids comes a hilarious new movie, Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. Coming exclusively to video.
Once again, we return to the concept of seeing the world through the eyes of shrunken down characters. Though as the title implies, this time it's Rick Moranis and the other adults that get miniaturized, and it's up to the kids to save them. Behind the scenes, we also got a return to horror and 1950s sci-fi, with 2 very knowledgeable crew members. Director Dean Cundy had worked as a cinematographer on genre staples like Halloween, The Thing, the Back to the Future trilogy, and Jurassic Park, while co-writer Joel Hodgson had created a little series by the name of Mystery Science Theater 3000, basically a love letter to the type of B-movies that inspired the original Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Even with all this talent, Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves just couldn't escape from the fact that it was a direct-to-video movie with a direct-to-video budget that was less than half of the originals.
Talk to a bug.
You know, find some common ground.
Hi. My name's Diane. I see you've been enjoying some of the crumbs from the coffee cake I made.
Well, Disney had pulled this off with the Aladdin sequels, which had debuted on VHS a few years earlier. They had a much harder time with a live-action special effects film. This left Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves feeling like a smaller and sloppier retread that never justifies its own existence. And without the budget for larger sets, most of the miniature scenes are just blue screens with digital backgrounds. Now, it doesn't quite get to offensive levels of bad.
We're in serious trouble.
Oh, come on, Patty. It won't be that bad. I mean, we'll have to find a shoe to live in. But the kids are messy eaters. There'll be plenty of crumbs for us to eat.
But it all just kind of comfortably hovers a peg or two above feeling like an elevated TV episode, which in all honesty may have been by design, because that's exactly the direction that the franchise was headed for its next and final stop, at least for now.
Some dads are happy mowing the lawn and washing the car. Not Wayne Szalinski.
Don't you hate when that happens?
He fills his spare time with cloning, time hopping, and brain swapping. You know, the normal family stuff.
My inventions work fine. Danger! Danger!
You get the general idea.
The hit movies have been sapped into Disney Channel's newest series, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the TV show. Every day, only on Disney.
Only 6 months after Shrunk Ourselves hit home video, Disney released Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the TV series. This soft reboot goes back to the time between the first and second films, and introduces more gadgets with more adventures.
They'll see Grandpa from the inside.
An ancient curse holds the secret of immortality, and Diane's fallen under its power.
It's a dose of mental magic.
Somehow we have all developed psychic powers.
It wasn't revolutionary and certainly felt exactly like what you'd expect from a mid to late 90s syndicated TV show. But what it did have was a lot of imagination, and it knew how to have fun with the concept while not taking itself too seriously. Of course, this being a modestly budgeted show, none of the original actors returned to their roles. But in a way, we kind of got something better. Starting in season 2, Ed Naha, who had worked with Stuart Gordon and Brian Usna to develop Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, took over as head writer. And, speaking of Stuart Gordon, he also returned to direct a horror-themed episode, over a decade after having to step away from the original movie.
A mouse!
For the most part, it seemed like the franchise would end in 2000 with the TV series. Sure, in 2002, we got a little Wayne Szalinski Easter egg added at the entrance to Epcot's Journey into Imagination with Figment, but in 2018, things really began to look promising, because Disney announced that Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was one of a handful of franchises that the studio would be rebooting for Disney+. We'd soon find out that the movie, titled Shrunk, would star Josh Gad as Nick Zielinski, who ends up shrinking his own kids. Before too long, we'd also get word that Joe Johnston had signed on to direct, and even Rick Moranis would make his triumphant return to live action. But as luck would have it, right before Shrunk was scheduled to begin production,
Disney announcing that it is halting production on its live action films due to coronavirus, saying there have been no confirmed cases of COVID-19 on their productions. Due to the current environment, they think it is in the best interest of cast and crew to pause production on their different projects.
And while all halted productions had resumed by the end of the year, there was just one exception.
Look, the heartbreak is we actually were weeks away from filming it on multiple occasions. And it's come so much closer than I think anyone knows. And part of it was really my schedule and my fault. And then, you know, part of it is that I think Disney's got different mandates right now. But I still believe that there's an audience for an actual sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Will Shrunk ever finally get off the ground? Will we ever see any additional entries in the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids franchise? When it comes to Walt Disney Pictures, it's hard to be too confident these days.
It's a human. What did you think I was? Nothing.
But no matter what, we'll always have that larger-than-life universe filled with wonder, adventure, absolute terror, and the seemingly endless fantasy that so many of us were so lucky to experience. And it all started when a couple of horror filmmakers had an idea to create the kind of B-movie they had loved growing up, but for a new generation of kids.
I think we all want that. We all want to think that some stupid idea we have kind of makes it into the zeitgeist, into the culture, make a ripple somewhere, right? So, of course, that's why it's fun to see these old movies that someone like you still wants to talk about.
But if you want a mad scientist tale that Disney really went extreme on, check out my video on the Mickey Mouse cartoon that they still don't want you to see.